This provides a somewhat different perspective on cross-national policy sharing, and it's actually reminiscent of something said by Horace Mann, that early policy tourist in Europe, when he was secretary for the Massachusetts Board of Education in the 1840s, that I mentioned earlier. As well as the quote where he was advocating policy borrowing that I gave you earlier, his visit also led him to reflect that if we are wise enough to learn from the experience of others, rather than await the infliction consequent upon our own errors, we may yet escape the magnitude and formidableness of those calamities under which some other communities are now suffering. And in fact, Tony Edwards and I identified an example of this sort of negative policy borrowing in our 1998 paper in Comparative Education, when we noted that Britain's Independent National Commission on Education cited the Carnegie Foundation's 1992 study of school choice to justify its own warning that similar reforms in England's steeply tiered education system could have the unacceptable consequence of actually increasing unequal opportunities. And in that case, there was a clear recognition both of the possibilities of learning negative lessons from abroad and of the importance of context. Now, such an approach will probably not appeal to politicians looking for magic bullets, but it might have more appeal to a wider public who tend, like researchers, to be somewhat sceptical about magic bullets. Of course, as education researchers, pointing out the limitations of, for example, charter schools as a panacea to policymakers can often seem a somewhat thankless task. But that's no reason why we shouldn't keep pointing out the nuances and the niceties, because we have a wider job as public intellectuals in addressing public attitudes to education policy and reform. In the UK, the Fabian Society, which in view of my earlier comments I must clearly identify as a left-of-centre think tank, recently published a report on narrowing the attainment gap between pupils from different socio-economic backgrounds. What made this piece of research stand out from the raft of existing commentary was its focus on public opinion in relation to educational inequality, and the way in which this has generally been shaped by prevailing and often misleading political narratives around educational failure. Education researchers can help in challenging that narrative and changing the terms of the debate by reinforcing messages not just about what works, but also about what doesn't work, and most importantly, why it doesn't work. In Levin's terms, cross-national comparisons of reform may thus provide a way of strengthening the public mind on education to increase resistance, as he puts it, to superficial but seemingly attractive policies. Policy inoculation may thus come to be a more appropriate metaphor than policy borrowing, and such work in turn might come to be seen as at least as legitimate a form of impact for education researchers as the questionable quick fixes encouraged by a narrow what works philosophy. But it should be clear from what I've said today that such work, if it's developed, will need to take place on a global scale. And I like to think this may be something that our two institutions, Teachers College Columbia and IOE London, can work together on in the future. Thank you.